enjoys Hornady. You might say accuracy is my business. I make bullets.
You are listening to the Hornady Podcast.
Thanks for joining us and enjoy the show.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to the Hornady Podcast. I'm your host, Seth Swerzik, as always. And a full table today to my left, the Assistant Director of Engineering, Joe Thielen. Across the table, Marketing Director, Neil Davies, and Senior Ballistician, Jayden Quinlan. Guys, thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, good to be here, man.
Yep. Thank you, Seth.
Now, before we started recording, the obligatory talk about it's hunting season. That's what we were talking about. It's what I've been talking about for the rest of the day up to this point. And I don't have you guys here to talk about hunting, though. As excited as we are about this time of year, I hope everybody's having a good season, though, and is successful out there. But I wanted to bring you guys together to talk about something that I think is at least a little bit misunderstood, or is properly understood but not necessarily by a lot of people. And so I want to put this information out there and discuss it with you guys and hear your opinion on why it's important that a cartridge is SAAMI approved. And what is SAAMI? What is the purpose of approving a cartridge? And then how does that benefit everybody, not just the industry, but the shooter, the ammunition manufacturer, the literally everybody in the line? And I'd like to relate it as we get progressed into the conversation a little bit to wildcatters, because we've had people say, "Oh, I've been shooting this wildcat for X amount of years, and it's the same thing as fill in the blank, 22 ARC, 7 PRC, whatever, and you stole it from me, and you're just in this to make money and blah, blah, blah." And I want to answer some of those questions because I don't think everyone quite understands it. So to talk about why it's important, let's first identify what SAAMI is. And to do so, we're going all the way back to 1926. And I have prepared something that I'd like to read. I didn't prepare anything. This is from SAAMI.org, so SAAMI.org, and that stands for the Sporting Arms and Ammunition Manufacturers Institute. So right here, SAAMI was founded in 1926 at the request of the federal government, and it was tasked with creating and publishing industry standards for safety, interchangeability, reliability, and quality, and then coordinate technical data and promote the safe and responsible use of firearms. So right there in that first line, at the request of the government, it was tasked with creating and publishing industry standards. And I think that's really where this conversation needs to start.
Yeah, and it's a voluntary organization. I mean, Hornady is a member of SAAMI by our own choosing. And we don't get paid anything. It doesn't we pay to be a member of SAAMI, so it doesn't. I think people think, oh, SAAMI, and they're paying you to cartridge. No. Whoa, we're voluntarily a member of SAAMI, and we want to be a member of SAAMI along with a bunch of other companies to carry out that mission statement that you just read. Quite frankly,
yeah. I mean, it's a technical group that gets together and standardizes or agrees to standardize cartridge designs and twist rates, and chamber specs, and all that stuff. That way, all SAAMI members voluntarily adhere to those standards and will build guns or ammo commensurate with what was voted upon. There are plenty of companies also in the industry that are not SAAMI members. Some, hopefully they start looking at becoming SAAMI members at some point if they start to grow. But again, it's a voluntary organization, like Joe said, but it creates standards that everybody can adhere to for pressure, velocity, and safety ultimately.
Right, and you need that, and I think whether you're a member of SAAMI or not, if you're building firearms or if you're building ammunition, you have a set of standards that's published free of charge on SAAMI.org that you can double-check the stuff you're making falls within those standards. So, Joe, real quick, you get a cartridge. Why is it important for the ammo and the chamber? Like we do when we design a cartridge, we design the cartridge and chamber at the same time. Why is that important for the gun builder to have that SAAMI approval?
Well, that is the cartridge and the chamber go together as a SAAMI introduction, if you will. So you can't bring a cartridge without a chamber or a chamber without a cartridge.
Okay.
And the reason that's important is it all boils down to the ammunition and the gun manufacturers get together and set these standards for testing, dimensions, all of the things that make the cartridge and the chamber work together. So the ammo in the gun, no matter who builds it, will be interchangeable. It's safe. You get the levels of performance that, you introduced a cartridge and chamber to give you these performance characteristics. Well, then if you build the said components and parts, you get those.
You get that performance.
You get that performance.
And is there tolerances that are associated with that as well?
100%.
Yeah.
Yes. Yep.
I think that's an important one. Is it's not just the specifications, like it calls out a dimension of this. Yes, that's the bottom spec. Let's say if it's on the small end, but there's a tolerance and what's acceptable within that tolerance range, and that's really huge for you've got dozens of people building firearms and dozens of companies loading ammunition. Well, who's to say that ammunition X fits in firearm Y?
Yeah.
And are they going to be a safe, is it a safe compatibility?
Absolutely. Yep. So I know we're going to talk about it, but that benefits everybody. I mean, benefits us, the consumer, the shooter, the gun builder, anybody that wants to build a rifle, they can go look up the SAAMI specs and build a SAAMI rifle or have one built for them or whatever, and then go purchase ammunition and use it. And it's a win for everybody.
Yes. And I can see why, in the early 1920s where, firearm manufacturing, and not just firearm manufacturing, but manufacturing has become a lot more proficient and efficient, and so the rate at which they can build things as an industry.
Yeah, you're talking like Model T assembly line was just kind of starting, right?
Yeah, so you've got the rate of firearm manufacturing increasing, and subsequently, I would assume ammunition is following that same trend. And what if things don't work together? That's a problem.
It's a major problem.
And where does the consumer go? You order a rifle from Sears and Roebuck's, and you buy, ammunition from where you can get it, and then it doesn't work, or there's damage to the firearm, or who knows what.
And then you and the consumer is left out in the cold.
And you don't have anywhere to go from a troubleshooting standpoint back then, because generally what you do with troubleshooting is you look to a known good condition and you assess your specific condition against that. What's the outliers? What's the anomalies? What's different about my thing that has problems and this thing that's standardized that doesn't? Without those standards, I mean, the shooting community wouldn't be what it is today. Most definitely, because you would be experiencing totally randomized problems, and it would be really difficult to get to the bottom of it without a standardized process,
right?
And dimensions and all that.
Yeah, and so you look at some of the traditional cartridges that have been SAAMI approved cartridges for decades. You look at older pistol cartridges, let's say like 4440, and then some, not quite that old, but older rifle cartridges like the 3030 Winchester, let's say, and some of those rimmed cartridges, 4570. Well, you can buy a firearm that was built in 1940, 1935, and you can buy ammunition that was loaded yesterday, and they work together. Exactly how they were intended, and that's because of that adherence, the voluntary adherence to those dimensions.
Correct.
Yeah. So one question that I've had over the years, whether I go back into my technical service days or go to trade shows or just people within the industry, there seemed to be some confusion about if you introduce a cartridge to SAAMI, that somehow that benefits you financially, that there's some sort of royalty paid because you were the one that brought it to SAAMI. And we got to dispel that right now.
Yeah. You actually cost you money to take a cartridge and chamber to SAAMI and get it approved, because there's a cost associated with the membership and all the legwork to do all that stuff and attend the meetings and be there and everything. So yeah, it's much the contrary to getting paid. You're paying to do that, but you're doing a service to all of the, the builders and users and customers that are going to shoot that cartridge and chamber, if you will. So yes.
Yeah, it benefits you in the long run, because
absolutely,
it's worth spending that time and effort and money up front, with the end result hopefully being an approved cartridge that then has essentially been stamped with a level of approval that gains the confidence of everybody else out there, right?
Yeah,
they say, okay, if that thing's been standardized by SAAMI, I am comfortable in building a firearm for it, or whatever,
or some
loading
auxiliary stuff, making a magazine for it, or something along those
Absolutely.
lines.
But what else happened? So when it goes to SAAMI, gets voted on and approved, all the specs are out on the SAAMI website. So let's say Hornady introduces a cartridge, we spec the chamber dimensions, twist rate, everything like this. Well, okay, now everybody out there can access the SAAMI website and order reamers, and all the other ammunition manufacturers can make ammo that's just like what we introduced. So we don't patent it. It's not trademarked. It's nothing like that. It's now in the domain for anybody out there. They want to try to make this, go for it.
Right.
Hornady Outfitter ammunition is now loaded with Hornady CX bullets. Its optimized monolithic design, combined with a heat shield tip, offers extended range performance, enhanced accuracy, high weight retention, and deep penetration. Outfitter ammunition features corrosion-resistant nickel-plated cases that are sealed watertight, designed to perform under the toughest conditions. No matter where adventure takes you, trust your hunt to Outfitter ammunition from Hornady.
When you brought a good point up there, Neil, I mentioned that I've had people, on social media and call up on the phone and whatever over the years, and I'm sure you have too, that assume, you're just, you introduce cartridges so you can make money. Well, we sell ammunition.
We do that. Yeah, we're a for-profit business.
Yeah,
so.
But we don't get money for introducing the cartridge. But you mentioned patent and that kind of thing. So let's look at a situation where that was the case.
Yeah.
And we're talking about the Winchester Short Magnum line of cartridges, and there was royalties to be paid to chamber guns in those and load ammo.
A lot of manufacturers turned their back on the cartridge for a while because they didn't want to pay the royalties.
100%, we did.
So nobody wanted. Yeah, in fact, we had it in our catalog, and the day it was supposed to go to the printer with the 300 WSM, I forget what, maybe a 270 as well. Anyway, so it was in our catalog. We were going to introduce it for that year, and then this lawsuit came down, and the verdict was released, and we took it out because we didn't want to pay a royalty on it.
No,
and nobody does. So anyway, but SAAMI, then it's now in the domain.
Yeah.
Anybody out there can make a product for it, and patenting this and that and the other thing. It's a good way to not have other people make that.
Yeah, well, that's exactly the point.
That's just a reality. Like,
it's a good way to
major
stifle.
Manufacturers just they don't want to pay a royalty on something. They'd rather not. But okay, they pay royalties, I presume, on some other patents that they share with other manufacturers. So that happens a lot. So that does occur, but not for a cartridge. It's a brass cartridge case typically with propellant, a projectile, and a primer. So that's been done for a long time. So,
right. Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, that point, though, was made. Is as soon as that patent expired, now you have...
Yeah, game on.
Now we load Winchester Short Mag ammo. There's still rifles available. Largely, it's 300 WSM is kind of the lion's share of those cartridges that remained popular. But if you do try to do that quickly, like you'd mentioned, Jayden, it just stifles it. Mm-hmm. And so, again, we do not get any sort of royalty from any company because we introduced the cartridge. So let's let the record show.
Yeah, that's not true.
Well, and moving on from that, our goal from a SAAMI standardized cartridge and chamber is to do quite the contrary of stifle it, is to get it out there to the public. So Neil can build a rifle or go purchase one and ammo and get the level of performance that was once available only to wildcatters.
Yeah.
Now is available to...
Yeah, you can order a reamer and chamber up your barrel if you're skilled at machine work.
That is Hornady's, that's our goal, is to bring a level of performance to everybody and not just have it, kept to ourselves or wildcatters or whatever it is. So
a perfect example of a cartridge you have, for example, the 300 Win Mag. And since the 50s, that cartridge has just been hugely successful. Big cartridge, lots of velocity. Well, over the years, it's been pretty evident that chamber dimension and tolerance it leaves a lot to be desired. So you end up with 300 Win Mag match, 300 Win Mag tactical reamers that are sometimes within SAAMI specification, just certain dimensions are held tight. And then you have the tinkerers, the wildcatters, and you end up with people that have custom-built guns, chambered in 300 Win Mag, shooting bullets outside the length restrictions of SAAMI spec at velocity and pressure ranges that are probably outside of SAAMI specifications, and they have custom twist rate barrels to shoot these super sexy bullets, and they end up with something awesome. 300 Win Mag. Yes, it's a 300 Win Mag, but it is absolutely a long-range cruise missile, shooting huge bullets, super accurate.
I mean, I have a 300 Win Mag that Dave Emery's chamber design, I think. So, yeah, and it head spaces off the shoulder instead of the
belt.
Instead of the belt.
And it took a custom gunsmith with a custom reamer and a custom barrel to get all of that. So,
and you are not, you are not guaranteed to go buy ammunition and have it work in there.
Yeah.
I mean, it does for the most part,
but you're
thankfully,
not,
you're
I've
not
never
guaranteed.
shot that gun, I don't know, a pressure velocity, so it's still a bit of a wildcat situation.
That's my point. It's still that is performance for Neil Davies.
Yeah. Exactly. And it's great that you have it and a handful of others have it. And like to Joe's point, we're not trying to obsolete the 300 Win Mag, but you want that level of performance for everybody? Well, you make a 300 PRC and you put the super long range bullets that everybody likes. You design the cartridge case thoughtfully. You set the chamber dimensions and tolerances up thoughtfully with a good chamber. And now, instead of, Neil Davies having a custom built gun, well, now you can have my dad go to Sportsman's Warehouse, buy a 300 PRC, grab 300 PRC ammunition, and duplicate that level of performance with off-the-shelf components.
That's a good way to articulate it.
I feel like that right there is really what makes that SAAMI approval process so important.
Yes. That's 100%. A great way to lay it out.
There's risk there, and I've seen this happen. So we'll stay with that 300 Win Mag example. You've got a guy that's very savvy, right? He's got this custom 300 Win Mag built. He has so much knowledge that he specified all the chamber dimensions so that it will suit. He's going to shoot these long, heavy bullets and seat them out. Yeah, they don't fit in his magazine, but he's got a custom magazine that they do fit in, right? All these things because he's so knowledgeable. And he's got a friend that's just getting into that style of shooting and is super interested, but he doesn't have a lot of knowledge. And what his friend takes away with is, well, when he shoots his that very knowledgeable guy's rifle, he sees, well, it's 300 Win Mag. Says it on the back of the cartridge case. That must be what this thing is.
Says it on the barrel.
He goes and buys himself a 300 Win Mag rifle. And he goes and shoots some factory loads of ammo that he bought with it. And he's like, it doesn't shoot as good as my buddy's loads. And he goes and gets his buddy's load. And he shoots it in that Win Mag. And he has a high pressure result because of it. Because his buddy, in all his knowledge, correctly and safely developed the load for his rifle. But the chamber in there is not the same as a standardized 300 Win Mag. And he goes and takes that modified cartridge that still says 300 Win Mag on it, but it's really not anymore, and puts it in that factory rifle and has a major problem.
Yeah, and that's, again, it all comes back to just like that first sentence in the kind of the mission statement that I read from SAAMI.org. Is reliability, consistency, compatibility, interchangeability.
Yep.
That's huge.
There's been historically there's been some issues with some of these things. Like the 338 Lapua existed for a long time, and it was there was a variety of different chambers and
and it was CIP approved.
Yeah,
it was a CIP cartridge.
Approved, and it's like, do you build guns with this chamber? Do you build guns with this chamber? And it just, we struggled with that when we were making ammo and trying to get guns and trying to figure out which where to go with the thing. So that's why, that's a prime example of why you want something to go through this approval process with SAAMI. CIP, I forget what it stands for. I think it's French, but it's essentially the European kind of SAAMI, if you will. It was approved over there in those specs, but those weren't really adopted over here, and a lot of people were kind of modifying chamber designs, and so that's where you run into problems in the wildcat world, is when the chambers are kind of floating around.
Yeah.
Correct.
So that's a good point. Thanks for bringing that up, Neil. You have SAAMI, that's, the U.S. thing, and you have CIP in Europe. Is there a direct correlation between the two? Is there sometimes direct correlation?
So SAAMI, when SAAMI meets in that organization, is always in communication back and forth with CIP now.
Okay.
It's been a really, at least,
Not always the case,
but in my tenure, it has been a really good working relationship with CIP for exactly the reason that Neil just described. Look, if we're building ammunition in Europe and guns and back and forth, and obviously it's a global market, we need to ensure that our stuff is, married up.
Do you know when that kind of conversation started? Because historically, when you look back at some of the CIP cartridges, then you look at the SAAMI dimensions, it's like...
And they do differ, because some of their pressures are lower.
And they vary on their standardization process of their dimension stuff too. But I'm going to tell you, Seth, 2010, 2009, somewhere in there.
So for over a decade.
Yes, it's been a good work. And I know
it would have been way better if it had been in 1926, though.
It would have,
because there's still some...
But that was, I'm just saying that's when I stepped into it. It was happening before then as well. So they've been working with CIP, pretty good here for quite a few years.
And that benefits the international consumer. So
absolutely.
I hope people listening to this podcast really understand that this voluntary committee is so influential. It's not just helping us here. I mean, you guys are working with CIP so that the guy in Scotland getting a hunting rifle is having the same level of performance, whether he buys a JP Sauer & Son rifle or he gets his hands on a Remington that was made in New York. And that's really important. I want to shift gears a little bit now to talk about wildcatters, because that's another thing that over the years we introduce cartridges and we hear it all the time. People come out of the woodworks. Oh, I've been shooting a 22 243 for however long, and that's the 22 Creedmoor is this, that, and the other thing. Or they talk about how the wildcatters did it and you stole it from them. So let's talk about that for a moment, because one, wildcatters are going to wildcat, and that's great, and we do a bunch of that here. And two, in reference to quote unquote stealing cartridges, how does us as an industry taking a cartridge and getting it SAAMI approved, how does that benefit the wildcatter? Because I really think it does.
Yeah, well, I would say there was a whole lot of 280 Remingtons after the 30-06 was introduced, or 708s after the 308. I mean, it's time immemorial. This has been happening, but I come back to what we talked about earlier. The wildcatter benefits, well, Neil brought up, his custom 300 benefits him. If I have a custom wildcat, it's beneficial for me, and it's hard for me to get that out there for everybody else. And then just because I have ammunition that works in my custom wildcat system does not mean it's been standardized for pressure, velocity, dimensions, twist rate, all of those things. So it is just that it's a wildcat. There's nothing that's been standardized about that cartridge and chamber, and that is the huge differentiation between the two.
Sure.
Yeah, and one thing to make sure that we touch on is, we don't scour the internet or get on forums and see what's the new hot wildcat and get some guy's dimensions and grab it. No, these are all original ideas here, just like they were an original idea for that person.
Absolutely.
We've got some smart dudes here and all over the place actually that are always looking at what might be the next best, better mousetrap. And I mean, sure. And some of them came to us from other people. I mean, the 6 Creedmoor came to us from George Gardner back in the day with, an article that Jon Snow wanted to do on a Wildcat cartridge. And George was like, well, the 6.5 Creedmoor came out just recently. Why don't we neck that down to 6? Boom. So they worked with Ben Searing. Ben Searing created some dies for him, and Bob's your uncle got a new cartridge as a Wildcat at that point in time.
Yep.
And then, okay, cool.
Enough people wanted it.
Enough people wanted it. Sure, let's, we can make ammo. I mean, this is America. You can still do what you want and make money doing things.
Great point.
But we didn't go out and, no, that doesn't happen for us.
Yeah, we're not, like you said, we're not scouring the internet.
That was an original idea by Jayden. Had people neck down a Grendel down to 6, I suppose.
Yeah, it's got 10 different names. Yeah.
6 PPC is really close to. I mean, we could go on and on, but
that argument will never end. We will always have people saying, "Well, this existed before." Yes, by nature it did. Sure. Because if you look at the requirements of the two methods, what is required to do wildcatting? Walk to your reloading press and neck it up or neck it down. You can change shoulder dimensions too if you want. It's that simple.
Yeah, and if you want to, and you're listening, Ben Searing,
he'll make
dial us up at call Hornady Manufacturing, ask for Ben in the custom shop. He'll make you anything you want.
Right.
So go ahead.
So the time for that takes what? 5 minutes?
Yep.
And then, okay, well, you need a gun to shoot it out of, so you call a reamer manufacturer, you give them some description of what you want for tolerances on the reamer and dimensions. Wait, a couple weeks or whatever, you get a reamer, your gunsmith's real efficient, you get it to him, you got a rifle built, you have the thing shot in a month. I don't know, Joe, have we ever gone from concept to introduced and approved cartridge in a month? I would say no.
No.
It's a much longer period of time to do that.
When you can flush things out.
So by nature, that argument will always exist. But to the point, like, it's not like we have a staff of spies that go around and try to gather the dimensions that's being used by this guy in his garage in Kentucky, and then we, steal it and introduce it in secret, and then steal all his money that he would have made by shooting it on the weekends. Like, that's not how it works.
And nor neither does any of our competitors / friends out there on the ammo side, or that obviously we can't speak for them, I suppose, but nobody's doing that. And there's a lot of work that goes to standardize it. Like, interestingly enough, if you look back at the history of Hornady, there's been some cartridges that we've introduced that I don't know all the details on them, but presumably they were just wildcats that somebody needed to bring it to SAAMI to standardize it. So what, 220 Swift, right? So
450, 400. Not necessarily a wildcat, but not SAAMI approved.
Somebody had to bring it to the industry, and as a SAAMI member, hey guys, let's standardize this thing. So yeah, the 220 Swift was a wildcat. 22-250 was a wildcat. So
I would argue almost every cartridge that's been introduced to SAAMI was in some form a wildcat before that. It's just Jayden articulated it perfectly that you can wildcat something faster than you can get the pressure barrels, the prints, and all the stuff done. You can just go physically do it versus setting up all the stuff you need for the standardization of a cartridge.
There's a tremendous amount of work that these guys do, and obviously you did back in the tech days, in the engineering days, to make sure that it is safe. Pressure, velocity, using the right powder so you're getting a complete burn. How does it work in a suppressor? How does it work with is it work in a semi-auto weld? Does it work? Is it just a bolt gun? And the simple, hey, I could open the bolt test is
or
cool. Great, cool. If that's what you do for your wildcat stuff, rock on. But it is not what you can do in a production setting.
Correct. 100%. And I think,
I was going to say, I can understand a little bit of, maybe that crying out or frustration from those folks that said, "Oh, you stole this from me."
Because I worked hard on it.
Right. If I take myself before I ever worked at Hornady or in the industry, if I had done all this research and time and effort and spent some money on creating this new thing, and I thought it was great, and then this company introduces something that looks very similar to it, performance is very similar to it, I could see where you're like, oh, they kind of stole it from me, although there's nothing to steal, right?
Yeah.
All we're doing is saying, hey, generally there's a name change, right? So we have a distinguishing identity between things that might be slightly different, but those differences do matter. And then it goes out to the world and everybody can have it. So I can understand it, at surface value, how somebody could become frustrated, but
for sure,
there's not much depth to that. That's just not how that works. It's not how the industry works.
In the company's history, there have been some things that have come in from, quote unquote wildcatters. They were basically industry folks that weren't necessarily a SAAMI member or something like that, and they wanted us to do it. So, the 300 Whisper was one. There's been a few more in the company's history that have come in that way. So, we've entertained those things in the past, but when they came in, we still had to probably do some engineering on it to make sure that it worked in a production setting. So there's usually something that got done. Even the 22 Creedmoor is something similar to that too, where we have basically a distributor that's selling it exclusively, but we did some work to it to make sure that it works well, and because it floated around in that wildcat world for probably too long, and there's just
rein it in.
Yeah, and there's a lot of different variants than. So somebody has to standardize it, and that's basically what we did.
Well, and you said early on that you think that the introduction of SAAMI cartridges actually benefits a wildcatter.
I do.
And I'm going to tell you that I agree with you unequivocally, because that is what drives new innovation to have, whether it might be a wildcatted cartridge over here, and then it gets introduced to SAAMI, and it's a cartridge, and then they wildcat that cartridge. Yeah. Then another, seriously, and it creates a vibrant and lively industry, healthy industry, because by introducing new cartridges to SAAMI, I have something to wildcat to whatever it is after that, and then after that.
The 6mm ARC is purpose-built to achieve unmatched performance never before delivered from the AR-15 platform. The 6mm ARC is suitable for a variety of applications, from personal defense, match shooting, as well as hunting. Designed to meet the demanding needs of the world's toughest critics, the 6mm ARC, a truly advanced rifle cartridge from Hornady.
Great example of that was the 7PRC. The 7PRC rolled out. People initially upset that it wasn't a 300 PRC neck down, which ballistically doesn't make a ton of sense, but that's what there had already been wildcatters that neck down the 300. They called it a 7PRC. Well, we come out with our 7PRC, and the case is a little shorter. Well, now they're wildcatting more. Oh, I take that 7. Let me neck that down to 6.5.
Yeah, 100%.
Like you mentioned, it's gets people excited.
Or they get upset because, hey, we sound like anyway, we're pro wildcatting. We think it's fun, and we encourage people to do it. Because
I like doing it. It's fun.
It's part of my job.
So it expands the whole industry, and people get new toys and come up with fun stuff. But yeah, I mean, it's not going to change. It's something that people have probably been doing since we started making guns. I suppose a 54 caliber round ball was some point became a 52 or 50, a 50.
Yeah, whatever.
Exactly. Something changed, And
I hope that never changes in the industry. I hope there's always a big, healthy group of wildcatters that are playing with. It's Jayden's official job, but it's just it spurs more innovation. And so whether that be barrels, actions, like the medium length action, that was just magicked into existence because people were pushing boundaries of. Generally, it was 7 Remington short action ultra mag or cartridges like that where they were pushing the boundary. So here's an action. Magazines, Wyatt's box mags. Hawkins has done a great job with their magazines. Yeah,
there's cottage industries built around all this stuff, and specialty products that you can buy, and that's fun to see.
It is.
It's fun to watch that happen. What's also really fun is when we do AR type cartridges, because man, boom. There's just a lot of sales on that AR
like
side.
The 22
so
ARC.
Easy to configure and build with.
Well, who doesn't like to get that barrel? Accessorize. I mean, we all do it.
We all do it. When you take your old 5.56 barrel off your upper and you kind of chuck it in the trash.
I'm gonna use it as a tomato steak.
And then you slap that 22 ARC barrel on there.
There's some of that.
Yeah.
So and we've all spent an exorbitant amount of personal money on some of these things that the company has come up with. So, well, now I got to have that. I got to have that.
That's all part of it. I do want to kind of go back a little bit and bring something up that Neil mentioned, that the 6mm Creedmoor, Jon Snow wanted to write an article. George had probably already been playing with the 6 Creedmoor, and it existed in the wildcat space, and not for that particularly long, less than 5 years, I believe. And so that was really cool. And then it became SAAMI adopted. So the SAAMI approved cartridge. Well, when it got SAAMI approved, initially there was a little bit of heartburn because, there was this reamer out and it had 140 thou freebore, but the SAAMI guns got 180 thou freebore or whatever it was. And there was some problems initially. And that's exactly why it's important to become standard SAAMI approved.
Yes.
And there's a good point there. Well, why was it 140 when it was wildcatted, and then why was it standardized at 180? Had essentially more room in it. Well, when we standardize something, we don't just look at one application. Where they were probably looking at one application when they wildcatted it. Generally, that's what a wildcatter does. He wants performance in a certain way, long-range shooting or whatever it may be. And so all of his concentration in the changes that he's making to an existing cartridge is in support of those things. But when we standardize something, we have to take more of a 30,000-foot view approach and say, okay, it's got to fit that bill, obviously, but it might be used for this. There might be hunting. There may be whatever.
What about these other bills? Yeah.
And so when you specify those dimensions, that's one and done. Once it's standardized, you don't get to go back in and start changing stuff around because you didn't consider that in the development process. So we have to take more of a broad approach, and that's why sometimes you see that occur.
Excellent. And I have kind of one more point about the SAAMI approval process. We've talked about it loosely here over the course of the podcast, but one thing I want to drive home for the listener, when we look at cartridges, we talked before recording about the 6.5 PRC, and what we talked about was for years, long-range hunters, antelope hunters, deer hunters, shot a 6.5 284. and they shot a 140 grain bullet doing 3,000 feet per second, and that's cool. Well, when you look at the SAAMI approved dimensions and pressure and velocity, you can't make a 140 grain bullet do 3,000 feet per second within SAAMI approved pressure limits in a 6.5 284. You just can't do it.
Not enough boiler room.
So that's why you see a 6.5 PRC, more thoughtfully designed with that strategic thinking that it can do a lot of jobs and it can get those performance criteria that people were pushing the boundaries of a 6.5 284 to get.
A 6.5 284 case is hard to make as well.
Yeah. So I wanted to get specifically to the velocity and pressure of and how it relates to wildcatters and how it relates to what I'm going to call the real world, because in a lot of cases, the performance you were getting in your custom whatever, it's not in the real world. When you strap something into a piezoelectric pressure reading system and your line in the sand is 62,000 pounds of pressure, those velocity numbers that you think that you can get are generally sometimes not even in the same ballpark.
Yeah, right. We've seen that. I mean, I could go ahead, Jayden.
Yeah, I was going to say, most of that wildcat world is based on pressure signs, not pressure measurements. So guys look at primer. Does it have its radius left? Is it flattened? Is it cratering? What does the cartridge case head look like? Is the imprint of the lettering becoming like smashed out? Like all those different things that we look for. Those are not pressure measurements, they're pressure signs. And you can have pressure without there being pressure signs. And so for that to be the standard, it's irresponsible because that's one set of specific conditions: barrel, action, cartridge. If I take that cartridge and then put it in a whole nother set of conditions, barrel, action's totally different. It's not responsible to think that it's going to do the same thing there because it may not. And safety is the most important aspect of all of this.
Yeah, this stuff goes bang, obviously. I mean,
yes.
So you do got to be careful.
Absolutely.
Joe, you were going to say something?
No, I was going to reiterate what he said. I'm sure we'll take some heat for this, but we have tested this and seen this so many times by looking at a head of a cartridge case, whether it be ejector marks, primer
Swipe,
shape, whatever it is. You cannot tell the pressure. You can't tell the pressure within 10,000 psi by looking at one to the other because of the different firing pin geometry and firing pin strength, the way the ejector pins are in bolt action rifles. There's a myriad of things. And guys tell me, well, will I mic the diameter? I get web expansion. Brass behave differently. Your dimensions of your chamber influence that way more than pressure does. I mean, at 60,000 psi, brass is going to move to fill the chamber, period, point blank.
Yeah.
And it does the same thing at 58 as it does at 68, fills the chamber. You can't tell the difference by miking it. So I know we'll take some heat for that, but we have seen this so many times, and then we're able to go shoot that ammunition in a test barrel that physically measures the pressure accurately, and there's no good correlation between X amount of primer radius is equal to 5,000 psi.
No,
it's not there.
Jacob, he's been on the podcast before. Jacob Morrow, one of our ballisticians, when he was downstairs in our accuracy lab, he did exactly that it was a Zermatt TL3 action, phenomenal action in a 223 Remington, and he was trying to find a spicy load to shoot of 75 ELD matches, and so he was just slowly, incrementally working it up, and everything was fine, bolts smooth, cases look like there's no pressure, and next thing you know, that one's missing a primer. Okay, well, that's pressure, so he duplicated those same loads, took them out to the pressure equipment, and found that a grain of powder, I don't know exactly what it was, but as he was working up, he crossed 62,000 pounds of pressure long ago, and he didn't see any pressure signs.
Exactly.
Until we all hand load too, so there's a chance that maybe we've done that ourselves too.
Yeah. Well, I'm just saying he had no pressure, quote unquote, signs.
Yeah.
And his only sign was it lost a primer, and that was north of 70,000 pounds.
Correct.
Right.
So that's a great point.
And people want to go fast, so that's
you
just
can't
a
help
thing.
it.
That's not going to change.
None of that.
We're not knocking it. There's nothing wrong with any of that, but you're responsible for your own actions. And us as a ammunition manufacturer, where our product is going to be used by an untold spectrum of consumers in different conditions, we have to make sure that it's safe across that spectrum. That's our responsibility.
Exactly. And we do feel like it's a responsibility, an obligation to the industry, and that's really important.
Another thing I'd like to touch on, and you guys will have to speak to it, but we do get complaints from time to time from folks that are seeing some kind of pressure issue or something else that's happening with their system with our ammo, and not in some of those cases it's a non-standard chamber reamer that somebody used. So that is another thing. I mean, when we design these cartridges, and when I say we, you guys, there's a lot of care taken to make sure that this thing is designed correctly, and then there are definitely people that want to tinker with that chamber design. Well, there's sometimes repercussions for that.
Yeah. Right. Mileage may vary if you adjust those dimensions. I mean, we designed it for a purpose and for a reason and on purpose to work a certain way, and tested the heck out of it to make sure.
It ties all in right back to the beginning of why SAAMI is important. So in that example, Neil, you have somebody's got our ammunition, they've got a factory rifle, and it's exhibiting signs of high pressure, whatever that may be, tough bolt lift, swiping the case head, etc. And we bring the ammo in. Well, because it's a standard SAAMI process, we have reference ammo that the industry's agreed on is the reference. So we can shoot reference ammo and say this barrel is testing pressure and velocity accurately. We can take that ammo, shoot it in that system, and say this definitively is the pressure it's operating at.
Sure.
And then we can take the firearm and safe to chamber, look at dimensions and go, okay, this dimension here is not within the specifications and tolerances, and this is causing the problem. But like Jayden mentioned earlier in the podcast, you have a standard to reference, and that's why it's so important.
Yeah, I just it's one of those things that, and again, that's also tinkering, that's also playing, and people are going to always do that. But like you said, mileage may vary. I mean, if you modify that chamber design, you're outside of what it was designed for, so things are going to change on you.
Yeah. Do you remember?
Or could change on you anyway.
Do you remember, Q, back when I had my target rifles, my bat action? So I had a 300 PRC with a big, heavy bat machine action on it. I could run 300 PRC loads with no problems, no issues.
Bolt flips
at
right open.
75 to 78,000 PSI, and it ran. The gun, it was mid-70s, and we went and took the same ammo, shot it in a pressure barrel, tested that, and then put it in a different, to your point earlier, a different system, and the primers fell out. The bolt couldn't. So I'm just saying, just by changing your components, changed drastically the result of the. So anyway,
And with that pressure and velocity relationship, we've largely been talking about bolt guns. Well, that just gets exacerbated when you put it into a gas-operated firearm. So we just released the 22 ARC, and that thing operates at 52,000 pounds maximum. So it probably lives between 48 and 50,000 pounds. And if you start putting 60,000 pounds into a gas gun, you're going to be shearing bolt lugs. Like, timing's going to be crazy. You're going to have more problems just because of the nature of the
operating system.
Right.
Yep.
So hopefully the listener out there, I felt like we haven't rambled. I feel like we've marched along and explained this pretty well. Hopefully they have taken away what it means to be a SAAMI approved cartridge for the ammo maker, for the gun builder, and for the industry as a whole, and why it's important. Because again, it is important and it benefits everybody.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and it does. It creates that standard. Like I said about somebody designs a chamber variant, well, now the potential is there that you might see some problems if you modifying reamers. Typically not a big problem ever with any of the major manufacturers because they're SAAMI members and they're going to adhere to those things. But then also you got to make sure that the wear on reamers is not excessive, and how you order your reamers. That's another thing, because how many guns can you chamber off of one reamer before that reamer goes bad? There's all manner of things that go into that stuff. But ultimately, being a SAAMI member is very important.
Well, another important point, and to your point earlier, Joe, that SAAMI is voluntary. If you ever have a problem out there with a given source of ammunition or a given firearm, it might not be a bad question to ask that manufacturer, do you adhere to SAAMI standards? That would be a good starting point, because if the answer to that question is no, you might have more concerns on your hands. Right. If the answer to it is yes, now you have a standard to compare that to and then figure out where the problem is.
Yep. It makes troubleshooting possible. It doesn't make it better, it makes it possible.
That's right.
Yeah, I think that's important. And
Utilize your space your way with the modular Hornady Security Square Lock Organizing System. Mount the Square Lock panels anywhere in your home or shop. Then attach the wide assortment of Square Lock accessories to securely store firearms, tools, gear, or any other valuables in any possible configuration. Keep your reloading bench or gun room organized with the Square Lock Modular Organizing System from Hornady Security.
Guys, I don't have anything else that I think we should need to talk about in regard to SAAMI. Obviously, there's a huge technical side to it that nobody wants to listen to, but I think as far as what it is, what it's for, why it's beneficial, I think we attacked it pretty well. Do you guys have anything else to add or any questions that you've been asked over the years that might be related?
No, I think for me, from what I've fielded in the past, we tried to articulate pretty good, why we do it, the reasons for it,
But I'd also say keep wildcatting.
Oh, 100%.
100%.
Keep wildcatting.
Jayden, you especially.
Keep building cool stuff. I mean, hopefully we make a bullet that'll work in all those applications. But yeah, I mean we are in one of the coolest industries. There's always new innovations and cool stuff happening. And yeah, so go play because we think it's important. We play, so everybody should.
Yep, I agree.
I mean, this is
just be safe, be careful.
Yeah,
this is ran longer than I thought, so I should probably go steal some cartridge designs from some wildcatters.
Oh, stop it!
Claim them as our own.
Yeah, but I do need to say this on this podcast. So Jayden is just back from a very successful elk hunt in Colorado with one of your mentors, right?
That's right.
Public land, private land. Where were you guys?
We put in 40 miles on both. Ended up getting some permission on some private land on the latter half of the hunt, and was able to connect with
I got to talk you
what my wife hates me describing as the bull of a lifetime.
It's a hell of a bull, so I'm really happy for you.
Yeah, what cartridge was that?
That was a 7 PRC.
Never heard of her? Yeah. It's probably a fad, actually.
Yeah. Former Wildcat.
Yeah. But it had head stamp brass, so it was kind of made it official.
Yeah.
It was a great hunt. It was incredible experience.
Yeah, well.
I saw a picture of it, I was like, man, that's a hell of a bull.
Yeah.
I think you were expected just to get like a legal 4 points on one side bull, and you shoot this 340 something or close to 340 bull?
I was looking for meat on the table, and if it was legal, I was going to take it. And
legal.
And then he just appeared out of nowhere.
Yeah. Well, now you have meat on the table and antler on the wall.
Yeah, that's
here
right.
in a little bit.
Yes.
That's right.
Let's talk about that. And a taxidermy bill. Right?
Yep.
Okay.
I don't want to talk about that publicly.
The money you save buying meat because you have an elk now will be just passed on to the taxidermist.
Yeah. So I recently learned what girl math was. Some of the younger guys around the shop teach me. They culture me with things.
Okay.
Because I kind of live under a rock. But long story short, I think that would be a version of boy math where I can justify my taxidermy bill based on how much money I saved in meat prices versus buying from the store.
Absolutely.
Right? I think you probably saved money in the long run, honestly.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. A lot of money.
Yeah, cost of the
enough
tag.
You saved enough money you get to do it again.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
At least a couple times. Inflation, I think that's how that works. I don't know.
Sorry to hijack the podcast.
No, that's important.
That needed to be said.
It
that was really cool.
And to bring it back up how we started the podcast, it is hunting season. It is right now. Yeah. I've been following the wife around with my nose to the ground for the last 3 days. It's the heart of the rut. I'm telling you what, it's hunting season, and everybody's excited.
TMI, man.
Yeah, but there's deer running amok on my drive into work.
Preston's giggling back here.
Yeah. Well, in all seriousness, it is hunting season. I hope everybody has a safe, fun, successful hunting season.
Get out there and hunt. You bet.
Yeah, and if you are listening to this, drop us a comment on the SAAMI approval process, and that whole thing. That's important. But also, I want to know what you guys are hunting, what you guys are shooting, what cartridge, what bullet. Was it a wildcat? Is it a wildcat? That's always interesting to know, and I like the interaction. I try to read most of these comments. I don't get to interact very much, and I know Preston back here, he reads every comment that comes in and responds accordingly, given the time constraints that we have doing actual work. But it's great to see the interaction. So if you got comments, please drop them here on YouTube or send us an email at podcast@hornady.com. Anything else, gentlemen?
No, I think we covered it.
Awesome. Well, Joe, it doesn't sound like you've got any big game hunting in the near future, but Neil, you've got like 3.
Yeah, game on
For the same species.
Yeah, but not, kind of not too far.
Year of the white-tailed deer for Neil.
I hope so.
I hope so too. Awesome, guys. Well, again, thanks for coming around the table and sharing this with me.
Appreciate it.
Yep. Thanks, buddy.
Guys, hopefully you enjoyed this podcast about why it's important to have SAAMI approval and how that benefits the industry and how it benefits you, the shooter. We hope you found it educational, and we'll catch you on the next one.